Okay. Margaret Apt on the other side of the screen has a number of titles, including elder, knowledge keeper, person working on the language, and I think counselor. Have I got that right?
At one time, I had been a counselor
Okay.
and a teacher.
And in what is now the United States, officials keep their titles. You call the former president, forever, senators, mayors, etc. In Canada, you lose your title when you are no longer in that office. How does it work in your nation, in what is now the state of Maine? Do you keep your title despite whether you've moved on? Are you still called counselor?
No,
But
called by my name,
elder.
an elder. I'm recognized as an elder. I'm recognized as the person who is working on the language to keep it going so that when all of the fluent speakers that are here now, once they pass, they will still have the language in the database and the books. And so hopefully we're saving it for the future.
Well, and that's very important among a lot of groups, and including the Francophones quite near where you are in what is now New Brunswick, Canada, and in Quebec. So we understand the importance of that. Is anyone who is of a certain age an elder, or is that a title that you must have bestowed on you?
No, when you reach, for us here, when we reach the age of 55, we are considered an elder, a young elder.
And what is a knowledge keeper? Is that a title bestowed on you, or how do you become a knowledge keeper?
I guess it's somebody that says I am. I'm just somebody that is always wanting to know where I was from and where I came from, and my language was important to me too, because it was different from English. Very young, I learned English as well. So before I started school.
Well, Elder Apt, let's start with language. Can you help us with any expressions that will help us understand baskets or tables or any other vocabulary? We've heard from an anthropologist who talks about a table being different in your culture than in Anglophone or Francophone culture, it bringing the food up to you. Are there any other words that you can cite that will help us understand culture better?
Oh, Midwagon, food. The foods that we traditionally, historically have eaten. Passamaquoddy people. I mean, that's what Peskotomuhkati means, really. People who spear pollock, and then that's who we are. Although it's hard to find pollock in the bay anymore.
It's now, unfortunately, the people who try to spear pollock.
Yeah, but it's the foods that we ate from the sea, on the land, the animals, and to me, that's all part of who we are too, as a culture. And we still have some people today that practice that. Very few, but they still practice the old food, eating the old food, making the bread. Actually,
Well, and what comes to my mind is the Italians and pasta, and the English and overcooked roast beef, and Asians with rice and so on and so forth. So we are all connected to our food sources, I would suspect.
yeah.
Now, let me talk about baskets. When you and I agreed to have this conversation, you told me that you had learned some things from your ancestors, grandparents, I think.
Yes.
What has been handed down to you about basketry and artistic endeavors in your nation?
Within my family, it was my grandmother that first introduced me to the basket making. And it was through my watching her taking care of the ash, getting it to the thinness that she wanted it, the width and the lengths that she needed to make a certain kind of basket. And the baskets that she made specifically, it was called the 4-inch. It was just a round basket, so high, and she would weave weave it with sweetgrass and smaller splints, what they called splints, to weave it. And then she'd make the cover, and then the little ring that held the cover.
So you could put jewelry or sewing material or toiletries or something inside, right?
Anything you wanted in it. And I asked her what they were for. She said, anything that you would like to put in it. Some people might put bobby pins, barrettes, ladies, men who have those, she said, might put fishing stuff in it, like hooks and stuff like that. And they keep. So I watched her taking care of the ash and preparing it to the point where she could make those baskets. And once that was done, she would put those aside, and then she would get the dye out, because some of them were colored. And she used to get the dye from the lady down the street who had a shop, and actually she sold her baskets to that lady, and other people on the reserve did as well.
I
So she would
assume
do
I,
that.
I I assume many dyes were originally naturally found, berries or other things that would color the wood or the sweetgrass.
Yes, historically it was, but when I was watching my grandmother, she got her dye from a little package. She poured it in the basin, and then she would take the once she got that going, she would take the ash that she had prepared and dyed it the color she wanted to do it, and then she'd lay it out so that it would dry.
Now, was this
And
done
that,
is it in your kitchen sink, on the kitchen table, in the bathroom, in the backyard? Where was all this being done?
well, back then we didn't have a kitchen sink. We didn't even have running water back then, but it was done in the kitchen. We had a wood stove that she worked from, cooked from. We did everything with that wood stove. That was our source of heat back then.
How
And
how old were you when your grandmother began teaching you these crafts?
my first memory of her doing that, I was about 3.
Well, many a 3, 5, 8, 10, 12-year-old doesn't want to do what grandma wants her to do. Were you cooperative?
Oh yeah, I loved being I loved helping my grandmother. I loved being with her. I loved watching what she was doing. And I would always ask her, what are you doing? And she would tell me. And then the one thing that I really remember was when she got done with all the ash, preparing it, getting it ready, the next step was taking the sweetgrass and getting that ready. And she would put water in the basin, and then she would put some sweetgrass in it, whatever she was going to braid. And once that was done, she would roll it up and let the paper soak up the excess water. And then she would get the chair ready and she would start braiding. And I always loved, I mean, really, I did this every time I saw her getting ready to braid. I would scramble, because the way the house was, it was a square house, and when you walked in was the kitchen, and then the other 3 rooms were bedrooms. That was how we lived back then. We had no running water, and we didn't have electricity until I was about 6. We didn't get running water or indoor plumbing until I was I was in high school. I just started high school. I was about 14 or 15. So she would braid her sweetgrass from the end of her bed in this room. And I would scramble and go up around and drag out the pillows, and I would lay down and I would just like this, watch her braiding. And you know, she braided so fast that that braid would hum. It was like humming as she was braiding, and it would put me right to sleep. And I would wake up when she had gotten supper done. And but that happened a lot, and she braided a lot, but I was always there. And then came a time when I finally had the courage to ask her if I could do that too. And she said, oh, sure. And she showed me how to do it. And she taught me that if you braid it loosely, you get a bigger type of braid. But if you want a real fine braid, then you braid it close.
You know, it sounds like this was not only a really important thing for her to hand down, and it was also an important economic activity for your family to generate some income. But just what that wonderful quality time that we sometimes get to spend with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent that we remember all our lives. Is that
Yeah.
it for you?
No, I lived with them. I lived with them. They took care of me when I was born. They took me in when I was born. And I
Uh,
was with them until I was about 3.5. And then my parents came and took me after the after after my mother reached the age of 18. Her and my father got married. And then shortly after, they came and took me from the reserve. That's why earlier I said I spoke both languages before I went to school, because I learned how to speak Passamaquoddy first. And I was starting to really speak it at the age of 3.5, because I had both my grandparents always speaking to me in the language, and my uncle, and actually the whole village. That's all we did was speak Passamaquoddy, and the only people that spoke English were the nuns and the priest that lived down the road.
uh, Elder Apt, if you began with your grandmother at about age 3, how much time did
No,
you spend with her? Uh,
no, I'm sorry. When I was born, they took me from my mother. My mother and father wanted to get married, but they just felt that she was too young and that he was from a totally different world, language, culture, train of thought, and they felt that they would never survive. And so she still went against their wishes and left with them, and they kept me.
what I mean
And
is you began the basket making with your grandmother at about age 3. How long
watched
did
her.
that carry on? Did you go back and visit her regularly and keep learning?
Oh yeah, and there were times that I actually just lived with her after they had established that they had the right to take me. And when I started school, they brought me back to the reserve to go to school. And I'm glad I did, because the young people that I knew were my age. We all went to school. The only difference was that all of them couldn't understand English. None of them, actually. I was the only one, other than the nuns that were given the instructions, that could really understand what they wanted from me. I have an aunt here that was in my grade too, and she didn't understand a word of English, and she did not know what was being asked of her. None of them did. So I was secretly telling her what she had to do, and I would show her, and so she'd do it. But the others, I remember one friend, he had his arms folded and he looked dead ahead. And whatever that nun said, he never responded. She put papers, pencils, everything. And he never touched them. He just looked and he just kept watching the clock until it was time to leave. He didn't want to learn.
Yeah,
And
not
he did it.
so what did your grandmother tutor you to the point where you could make your own basket all yourself?
Yeah.
And how old were you when that transition occurred?
Oh, I was about 9, 10.
And when was the last time you made a full basket from scratch?
Mm, oh gosh. The last basket I made was when the Alliance came down and everybody who wanted to make baskets could go over. So I went over, and this one of the men here that makes waste paper baskets about this big. I wanted to learn to make that, and so I went to him. He was there, and I told him what I wanted, and he gave me the material, and he showed me how to start it. I have it in the other room. So
And
it's about 10 years old, I think, maybe 15. It's been a while.
so you haven't made a basket in a while.
No, but
Have you tried to pass the skill on to others?
of baskets, no, I haven't, because my knowledge of it is limited. Of course, my younger sister Catherine has also mastered that art of making the tiniest basket there is, and that's a charm basket. And that's the first basket I ever made, and my grandmother taught me. And you use your little finger as the form if you want.
I've heard some people talk about baskets and other things, the tea sets and so on, made from wood, as a
Fancy.
matter of survival. When the land was taken away and the forest was prohibited territory and so on, that making the baskets through whatever means possible, whatever dye was available, whatever cord or was available of sweetgrass wasn't, this was a matter of survival. It's hard for us to understand that.
Yeah, it was, because everything else was gone. But we lived right near, we're 5 miles out from Eastport. And at one time, Eastport had, I know they had the tuna factory, but they also had like sardine factories. And they bought the scale baskets from here when they were doing that. So it was survival, and our people, my parents included, went to work in those fish factories because it was a way to earn your keep, to
Well,
help feed the family.
well, you've raised a good point that many of the baskets are really beautiful and they are obviously artistic. They obviously take painstaking work, the braiding, the dyeing, the pounding of the ash, the division of
Today,
labor.
that's what it is.
Pardon
But
me?
I said today, that's what those baskets are, more for show, because they are beautiful and they're beautifully done and they're so uniquely done. I mean, they're really artists because they see something and they put it together. But back when I was a child, most of the baskets that were made were for sale for outside.
And not just
And
baskets, pillows that
some
items to store
baskets,
your sewing disguised as pillows and hats and so on and so forth, right?
yeah, yeah.
But you raise another interesting point, and that is the utility basket. It seems obvious to me that hundreds of years ago, people might weave something, put it on their head, keep the rain off, keep the sun off, and that was a utility hat. They would make something to forage, and even in the US Civil War, there was a thing called a forage cap because the troops could go pick berries and put it in their hat and have a container to carry them in. It seems to me that that would have been an early thing to make as well. And then the kind of baskets you're talking about, in which one fishes lobster, you just put a basket in the water and out comes some lobster or some fish, or cleaned fish or what have you. Talk about those for a bit because they're kind of interesting too.
The baskets that were used to, for the fish, I was still young then, but I remember the men down here, they were busy all the time. They were either pounding or taking the ash off the log or scraping the ash. I mean, I can remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different areas at the point, at the main village where I grew up, was about 5 different locations where men were pounding ash or working with the ash, cutting the ash to get to the size of the basket. And then you'd see men making them. And then once they made the bottom, they would hand it to somebody else and then they would make the bottom. It was like an assembly line at some places. And I would see some of my friends over there watching and wanting to learn how to do that. And so they'd be working, getting stuff, just like what I would do for my grandmother. If she needed something, I would go and get it for her. If her baskets were done, I would take them to the shop. But a lot of times it was me just watching her and asking her questions about it and learning from her.
And
And
if I
same
remember
thing
what
with men.
I remember what you said earlier, that pounding ash was one of your first jobs with your grandmother, isn't that right?
No, not pounding ash.
Uh,
That was really for the men to do
uh,
because they had the strength, and there was an art in how to do that too.
but didn't your grandmother want you to make the ash a certain thickness or so on, or was that just
Yeah,
she wanted to?
once it comes off the log and they split it and they keep splitting it, and then she would cut a piece in and she would pull it and then she'd tell me, now you try it. But there's a knack to that too, because if you don't pay attention to what you're doing, you're going to lose it, like I did the first time. She said, now split that down for me. And I went like this and I tore it off. And she said, no, you don't do it that way. And she cut that part that I had destroyed, I guess. But later she went back to that and we were able to make those charm baskets from them, because the length of that charm basket for the basket would be about like that. And it would be this wide. So you have that kind. But she then started again and she showed me. And then she got that machine out too. I can't even remember what it is, but it's like this, and it's on the bottom. It holds, there's a bottom, and then it's like this. You take that ash and you slide it up through those 2 pieces, and then you start pulling, and you pull slowly so you keep it even. And then she was showing me how to do that. So I mean, it took some practice, but I got it.
Okay, so
I was open.
tell me about the division of labor. I'm assuming that there were some jobs that were for the men and others for the women. And were there some jobs for children or for anybody?
Mm. Well, yeah, anybody could join in and help. They'd always find some kind of work for you to do, even if it was just lugging ash back and forth to this man or that man, or going after something for them, bringing them water, bringing them lunch, and taking a break.
But did you
But
say that?
the men went and picked out the ash, cut it, brought it home, and then they started pounding it. And once they pounded it, then the women, and once they pound it and they took it off the log, and as much as they could, and then once they did that, they would split them. No, they take it out about that thick,
So
So
do you start pounding, do you start pounding the ash when it is a log that you've cut down a tree, you've got a log, you pound it. And what does it do? Separate the rings of the wood into thin
yes, yeah,
pieces? Ah.
yeah.
Well,
And the sound of the ash being pounded, it's a sound that we haven't heard in a long time.
you know, it's funny to think back and say, how did the first people who do this know that an ash tree could be pounded and separate the rings and make nice thin pieces of wood? You wonder whether they tried all kinds of trees or it was a gift from the creator or an accident or what.
I know, huh. Uh-oh, here it comes. It started.
Here comes what?
The northeaster,
Oh,
nor'easter.
okay. Yes, that's what you call it in what is now Maine. So the men would cut the tree, the men would pound, and then would the
They
women
cut
and
the tree,
children?
dug 'em out. No, not really. The women were busy with other things.
Okay. The
Okay,
men would split?
the men would do the pounding and take them off. And if they were too thick, they would sometimes split them. The men would split them. But then they would. There's a certain thickness for the scale basket, I would assume, as opposed to the smaller baskets. So, but that I really don't know, other than seeing, going around the reserve and seeing the men working and just listening to the pounding of ash, and that just was an everyday occurrence.
And was it weaving that was what the women were doing?
Hmm. Preparing the ash for fancy baskets, or more baskets that you could use at home, functional baskets, I guess you would call them, like a comb basket, where we put our combs in, that 4-inch basket. The pillow basket was more of a fancier basket. And then the oh, what do you call that? Pincushion basket. Just a small little basket, and then you fill it with oh, what was it? What was it that my elder, Marion, who has passed, um, she gave me one, actually, because I worked with her husband on the language, on the dictionary.
Now,
Anyway, it looks like a pincushion.
Elder Apt, you rightly say that everybody was involved, the men, the women, the children. Someone was making food. Can you tell me how this assembly line became assembled? Did somebody say this is the day to make baskets, or this is the season? How would that decision have been made?
It was made out of necessity. They had to work and sell those baskets. So they worked every day, just like everybody else worked. My grandfather wasn't a fisherman and he wasn't a basket maker. He was a woodcutter. So he worked in the woods. But there was a lot of them that made baskets here. And it was a way to live, for them to live and to support their families.
Can you share with me any of were there songs that went with this assembly line and work? And if so, can you share any? If not, can you share any of the language that pertains to this work?
I don't remember any songs. I remember a lot of laughter, joking around, talking about way back when they were young, and these are now adults, and we're hearing stories from them when they were small, when they were young.
So it's
Uh,
also an opportunity to pass down history and culture.
yes, yes,
Interesting.
yeah. And when back when I was younger, living down there. Whenever there was a death, it affected the whole reserve. When the body was brought home, work stopped, and everybody went to the family to help them in any way they could, because they were having a hard time with losing their loved ones. So we were there to support, to help, to feed, and everybody would come.
Elder Apt, thank you very much for your time. You've helped us understand baskets, their history, their importance, and I think many of us can pass an artistic endeavor or an artifact and just, notice it in passing, but you've helped us linger on it, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Or a one.
Would you like to say goodbye in Passamaquoddy?
There is no goodbye.
No, really?
But when we see each other and it's time to leave, we just, and it's been shortened, but it used to be Upchurch. I will see you again. But now it's Upchurch. And everybody understands what that means. We'll see you again.
Well, it's like mañana, or it's like à la prochaine in French, until we meet again. And isn't there also have a good walk?
Kulibamusan. Or,
Thank,
well, for us, for me, it's Kulibumyan.
thank you very much.
Wano.